Hello, welcome back. Brian Deese, Director of the National Economic Council. So good to be with you. On behalf of our team, I'm pleased to welcome you to the 2022 Public Finance and CFO Forum event. We truly appreciate your time and insights here today. Let's dive in. Exactly a year ago, you were in the final few moments of the presidential transition process. You were assembling the American Rescue Plan Act, which was introduced 366 days ago on January 14, 2021. Basically, one COVID dog year ago. Your old Obama White House colleague, Austin Goolsbee, speaking at our first public finance forum last year, wisely called the rescue plan a disaster relief bill. We've heard from many cities and states that this relief package, along with CARES in 2020, was a key stopgap for communities in deep reading after COVID who feared fiscal freefall. If you could, take us back to the rescue plan's passage and then give us an update on the Act's implementation.
Happy to, and I would start by saying, Dan, it's great to see you. You've been a friend and a partner for a long time, and it's great to be with the entire Milken Institute audience. And thank you for holding this forum and all the work and the learning that you guys are sharing over the course of time. You're really bringing me back. You're right. It was a year ago tomorrow, which also means a year ago tomorrow I was driving my electric vehicle down the eastern seaboard to move from Boston to Washington, D.C. during a pandemic, which I guess is echoes to what we have achieved over the course of the year that we'll get into. So look, on the rescue plan, I think there's a couple of important points as we reflect back to that over the course of the year. And to me, the most important bottom line is kind of the unique role that the American Rescue Plan has played in, as you say, disaster response and recovery over the course of the year, to use that analogy. Number one, the American Rescue Plan has been an engine of historically unique and historically strong economic recovery. We learned last week that the unemployment rate fell to 3.9% in December, which is an extraordinary number and an extraordinary fast reduction in unemployment, 4 years faster than most people anticipated. We haven't gotten fourth quarter GDP numbers, but all outside estimates suggest that we will end the year in 2021 with economic growth in the country between 5 and 6%. We haven't seen that since the mid-1980s. And we saw, because of the combination of wage increases and the direct support that the American Rescue Plan provided, that household incomes, even adjusted for inflation in 2021, have been up. And those three dynamics are only happening in America. Now, we have a challenge of price increases, a global challenge. Our European partners are seeing that otherwise, but the combination of strong growth and more healthier balance sheets is really unique to America and is largely a function of the American Rescue Plan. The second piece, though, was by design and I think in implementation, it really lifted people and geographies up from the bottom up and the middle out. The president likes to use that term, but it really helps to frame his economic philosophy. And that's true both for individuals. You think about the relief to reduce hunger in America. You think about the child tax credit and the reduction in child poverty, 35 to 40%, the emergency rental assistance, and the 60% reduction in evictions that we've seen over the course of the year. But also geographically, by design, there was an emphasis on the localities and making sure that the localities got resources in a way that they could put them to work, which has both averted some of the lessons of prior recoveries where we saw state and local government employment and state and local economies as a drag on recovery. We've seen those add to the recovery in 2021. And we have seen more locally grown solutions to the very specific problems that this virus and this unique recovery have created. Which gets me to the third point, which is that the rescue plan also had sustained support. And I think this is important, which is the rescue plan was not designed to be one and done. So, for many of you out there, you're still using the money to schools to try to not only address the current challenges with Omicron, but also to try to address with the learning loss issues that are going to be with us for some time now. That's true for childcare centers. It's true for state and local governments as well, who still continue to have flexible resource. And that leads to the final point, which is as we think about the other ways in which these resources can be put to best work, the American Rescue Plan is a bridge to the longer term effort of building back better, which starts with implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law. And we're already seeing rescue plan funds, for example, being used to help do job training for critical jobs in construction or in in transportation logistics. Or we're seeing investments in clean water that happened in 2021 as part of the rescue plan now being stitched together with a long-term effort to remove all lead pipes and service lines in the country. So our goal in 2022 is to make sure that those sustained supports in the rescue plan fit seamlessly within our longer-term efforts so that we're actually building durability into this recovery.
That's great. And what you're describing fits seamlessly with my next question. A good deal of our conference here is focused on strategies to accelerate the deployment of shovel-worthy resilient infrastructure projects using both Rescue Plan and now passed bipartisan Infrastructure and Jobs Act funds. I'm not sure I can say IJA, that acronym. I'm not ready to go there. But everyone here is thrilled that the Infrastructure Week jokes are finally over and we can begin an infrastructure decade. I know you've got a theory of the case about how some of that public risk equity capital can catalyze public-private partnerships and scaling up new industries for U.S. competitiveness. Would you share some of that?
Absolutely. And I think that I start with a little bit of historical context, which is we have seen in prior eras of American history when dedicated public investment efforts actually spurred extraordinary innovation, but also extraordinary economic opportunity coming from the private sector. The 1960s period in the space race is often referenced. But if you look at the federal investment, for example, in the domestic semiconductor industry, which is particularly salient now, given the challenges we have around semiconductor supply chains, that was a set of public investments that were made strategically in partnership with private enterprise that unlocked an enormous private industry. What we've seen over the last 40 years is really a kind of stepping back of an American commitment to make dedicated public investments over time in a way that actually will work with the private sector to build out more private capability. It has often been derided as industrial policy, as if industrial policy means something that will fail. We have tried to put forward a vision of an American industrial strategy that actually harnesses the best of what we know has worked in the past, but to put that in 21st century context. And we sorely need it. And so if you look at this infrastructure law, I see this really as the engine behind what we can show it will be a new American industrial strategy. And for example, this year, for the first time, our infrastructure investment will grow faster than China's for the first year in 20 years. We've got a shot at turning this around. At the end of the day, that partnership and getting that right is at the core of our approach to infrastructure. And certainly there are many examples where we have gotten it wrong. So now is the hard work. We have the high class problem of the hard work of getting it right. I would just a couple quick examples. Electric vehicle charging infrastructure, as I mentioned at the top. We have a classic chicken and egg problem. Public capital now, because of the infrastructure law, will be deployed at scale in states and localities all around the country with a particular emphasis on building out that network in places where the economic case is not strong enough and you need public capital. In rural areas, remote, less dense areas, in places where we're connecting corridors so that we can get people over range anxiety. But ultimately, we need to do that in a way that catalyzes a private market for EV charging and EV infrastructure, which is already on the rise. Broadband deployment, very similar. We've seen, extraordinary broadband deployment in the United States, but unevenly. And we've left out geographies and we've left out people, not just in rural and under-resourced areas, but in urban areas where there may be broadband infrastructure, but there's not affordable access. So we now have the tools in this law to get right the goal of getting high-speed, affordable internet access to all Americans, but that's going to have to be a partnership with private capital in the private sector. And then, the last near and dear to your heart and certainly the president's heart is the build out of clean energy and clean energy deployment at scale. And I'm incredibly excited about the investments in the infrastructure bill, for example, to build out the national, a 21st century interoperable electricity grid in this country. But we all know the challenges of that, working with the private sector, with states, localities, permitting. We have more examples of failure than success of that to date. We now have the tools and the resources to figure this out at scale, but that's going to require partnership. I mean, it's going to require partnership at every stage of the game. I hope and expect many of you saw the set of announcements we made yesterday about deployment and permitting. That's on the front end of a lot of the infrastructure law resources that will be coming out. But I guess the top line and the bottom line from our perspective is that we now have a law and resources that really are about showing that a dedicated campaign of public investment can scale opportunity working with the private sector. This infrastructure law is not about shovel ready as quickly and as fast as you can go. It's about shovel worthy and showing that we can build these big national projects in a way that will scale. The last thing I will say is we brought Mitch Landrieu, the former mayor of New Orleans, in to be our partner, my partner and our leader on implementing this law. If you haven't heard from Mitch already or from me, then definitely reach out. We're going to do this from the bottom up and the middle out as best we can. And the investments and the opportunities here bolt into and connect to what we need to get done on Build Back Better, which we are, we're focused on going forward legislatively.
Thanks, Brian. So let's shift a little bit towards climate resilience. And first of all, let's just review the bidding a little bit. So we had, $1 trillion COVID fiscal holes in 2020, 21 that were filled in with the American Rescue Plan. Then we had a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure deferred maintenance bill that's been, we've been behind the world on that for years, and we're now beginning to fill in, if you will, with the bipartisan bill that passed in December. And now we have this little climate crisis in front of us where, wildfires are happening in Colorado in May, tornadoes run for 250 miles. So, this third investment hole may be the biggest hole of all, sort of a climate booster shot, if you will. When you run the numbers and all this to 2050, we're looking at multi-trillion-dollar gaps in public and private capital that we need to invest 10 trillion at least in further infrastructure losses due to extreme weather if we go on top of it. So for many of us in the public finance field, we've been somewhat frustrated with the debate in the press over the Build Back Better climate investments, in the sense that it's been framed as how much it costs versus the life cycle value. As you begin the restart on this, will you be talking more about the case for doing all the math?
Well, I would say a couple of things. The first is, and I think many of you who are in the public finance know this in a very direct way, but our financial system broadly was built on an assumption of climactic stability. And that assumption no longer holds, and it means we have to reorient and rethink how we measure and assess investment and impact across the board. And anyone who is in and dealing with municipal finance or municipal bonds or otherwise would know very firsthand. If you're not thinking forward about the impact on future investment of physical climate risks in the United States, you've got a real problem if you're thinking about being able to issue and sustain debt issuances in the future. You take that and you think about that in the context of Build Back Better. We have been and are going to be very clear that at the beginning and the end of the day, the issue with Build Back Better is not the top line investment number. The right way to think about this is its net impact. And I would think about that in a couple of ways. The first is the net impact on our country's fiscal position. Is this going to actually increase net revenue and spending or not? And on that point, the legislation is fully paid for. And so therefore, the net impact on our fiscal position across time will be zero. And that's important because the goal of this is actually to make long-term investments that will increase the productive capacity of our economy. The second question, though, is what is the impact on our economic position? And there, what you see is if you make fully paid for investments that actually increase the productive capacity of our economy. If we invest in affordable childcare and preschool, we improve the education status of our kids, but we also get more people into the workforce. And if we do that, we can actually grow our economy in a more sustainable way and actually reduce price pressures over the long term. But probably the most important is the net impact for families, and this is about lowering costs. At the end of the day, if you think about what Build Back Better does, it lowers costs. It lowers costs for families' prescription drugs. It lowers cost for healthcare. It lowers costs for childcare. And to get to your question, it will help to reduce the cost that families, localities, municipalities, and states and our country are facing in an increasing way of the physical impacts of climate change. And so if we can make investments today that will reduce those costs, and we can do so in a way that doesn't actually have a net impact on our fiscal position, this is a significant win-win. To your point, that requires doing all the math. It requires having a conversation that actually is willing to account for the fact that unlike prior big legislative pushes over the last several years in Washington, this is fully paid for, and that it's done so in a thoughtful way. But even if you want to cut through and just make it a 30-second soundbite, that's what it is. It's going to reduce costs for families. It's going to reduce costs for municipalities and localities, states, and our country, because at the end of the day, when people have to pay less for childcare and healthcare and prescription drugs, and when we have less of the burden of the impact of climate change, that creates more opportunity to make our economy more productive going forward.
Thanks, Brian. Let me shift it a little bit to call it the Omicron economy question. As you know, we'd hope to have our public finance forum a couple of blocks from here and our CFO forum in person, but due to the new variant, we decided to make this the last best Zoom meeting ever, hopefully. We're all trying to ride out this latest wave, and I was hoping you could walk us through first what you view as the biggest near-term and medium-term economic challenges that you're facing and how you and the administration are handling it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we have a set of very meaningful near-term challenges, and we are working through them and using the tools that we have to try to work through them and help states and localities and private sector partners do so as well. It is important economically, I think, to think about our near-term challenges in the context of where I started. Our unique the unique strength of our economic recovery actually positions us to more effectively be able to navigate those. But if you think about our, certainly the Omicron variant is something that we are watching very closely on the economic side. The president's speaking to this today in terms of the additional resources that we are bringing to bear at the national level, in addition to the testing and the physical supplies that we're trying to surge around the country. And on the economic side, Omicron operates on the labor supply side. A lot of people are out sick, and that means that we're seeing some services getting disrupted. And it does risk having putting some additional pressure on the supply chain challenges that we already know are out there. So we're keeping a close eye on that. But we do have the tools and resources to go at this problem from an economic perspective. We have a set of geopolitical challenges that create economic challenges for us as well, that we're spending a lot of time on, including trying to do everything that we can to make clear to President Putin the cost and the stakes associated with him taking military action against Ukraine. That has a broader, economic lens around our European partners, global energy markets. So we're monitoring that closely. And obviously, the principal challenge facing American families and the president's principal focus economically right now is how can we focus on the prices and the costs that American families are facing, and how can we meet them where they are? That's about unsticking supply chain bottlenecks. And we're working in partnership everywhere we can, in Oakland and at the Port of Long Beach and LA and down in Georgia and Savannah on the port side. We're working with trucking companies across the country to try to get more registered apprenticeships, trying to be very pragmatic about things that we can do in that space. And it's also about making the clear case that the investments in Build Back Better would lower costs that people are facing. And if we can lower costs without putting upward pressure on prices economically, then we can actually provide some real relief for people on things like childcare.
Mhm.
So, so that's what we're waking up every day focused on here at the White House.
So I wanted to drill in a little bit. I think what's really interesting about, and this is maybe, I get tired of macro economists, making wild assumptions, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're not. I'm more of a micro community guy, and a lot of our focus on the public finance program is around equity. I think what's really interesting with both the infrastructure legislation and the proposals under Build Back Better and the climate boost in there is the focus on a number of things around helping underserved communities, what you might call emerging market America, both underserved neighborhoods in urban areas and in rural areas who need an extra boost of investment or capacity. Could you speak to a couple of the areas like that you guys are most interested in right now?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and I actually think that this is a place where the micro and the macro really are connected, particularly given the unique economic moment we find ourselves in, because the stakes for us as a country of actually unlocking the full potential of our labor force, but also of the country, are as high now as they ever have been, given the supply side challenges that we have at a macro level. So that means that I love macro and micro equally, but the micro becomes particularly important in this context.
I'm an out of the closet regionalist, so regional strategies are great. Right?
But specifically, I think that what that means is that we have to look at those areas of our economy because it's the right thing to do, and also the economically salient thing to do, where we have not unlocked the full potential. And in many cases, that's because we've explicitly, as the policy of the federal government, or implicitly because of structural barriers, we haven't done so. So whether that's going and having explicit partnerships with HBCUs and MSIs around building R&D and R&D clusters and facilities to help unlock innovation at the regional level, or whether it's recognizing that decades of deindustrialization have actually created these regional disparities in communities that we need to be very intentional about how we're going to resolve them, because they won't be resolved without a explicit a counterbalance on their own. Just to give you a couple very specific examples, one of the things that the president did his first weeks in office was sign an executive order creating an interagency working group to revitalize the regional economy of coal and fossil and communities where fossil fuels have been the central element of their economic prosperity. And I co-chair that working group with the goal of nothing pie in the sky, but very concrete, practical ways that we can actually meet those communities where they are and build economic resilience and economic strength based on the new emerging opportunities in our economy. It was really energizing at the end of last year. We brought together a set of businesses and community leaders to take stock of where we were, and the amount of enthusiasm from businesses to say, these are communities that have huge assets, human capital, physical capital, and if we have the right long-term incentives from the government, the kind of things that are in the infrastructure bill and in Build Back Better, then boy, we want to bring capital into these communities. We've also taken advantage of the tools that we have. We had $3 billion in the American Rescue Plan that Secretary to the EDA, the Economic Development Administration, that Secretary Raimondo very creatively has been deploying as part of a Build Back Better regional challenge, focused exactly on this question of how can we empower local communities with the planning and capacity building support, but then also the big dollars on the back end of that to really do game-changing, locally grown but regional economic development initiatives. So we're buyers of this strategy. We're particularly buyers of it right now, given the economic moment. And we also, the last thing I will say is I hope we operate with the humility to understand that implicit in good local and regionally based economic development is the humility that we need the ideas and the and the capabilities coming from all of you and from the bottom up, that what we can do at the federal level is be more effective at sharing information, deploying capital where necessary. But it's at the local level where both the problems and the solutions are always, going to come from.
Oh, that's great. And, our infrastructure panel earlier today was highlighting, think of the industrial Midwest and the potential for changes around carbon capture and the hydrogen economy and the opportunity for competitiveness there. I think as you go around the country, there's all those examples, and we discussed the announcement from yesterday, including the work of the Federal Permitting Improvement Council to speed up permitting, which I know is obviously a big issue around our favorite topic of deployment. We're short on time. I wanted to ask one last question before we let you go. And again, appreciate your being here. As an architect of the original Paris Agreement back in the day, and my guess may be a guy that helped edit a couple Larry Fink investment letters or two while you were in BlackRock, urging major investors to raise their game and meet this moment. I was wondering, are you an optimist or a pessimist about our ability to engage so-called sideline capital and get folks to lean in on all of this stuff? Is it more ministry of the future or more kind of a happy future in your mind?
I think I'm by disposition, I'm afflicted with being an optimist, and it's also I had the privilege of working for a president who is optimistic at his core about America's potential. So that is infectious. I think I would say that I am an impatient optimist on that front. I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. We are at an important moment, a critically important moment. But even with all of the noise and all of the challenge, if you look back even at just what happened last year and the infrastructure bill we were talking about, we haven't as a country made a dedicated public investment in our own industrial capability in areas that will help drive that capital deployment that we need at scale. And we're now doing it. It's not enough, and we need to move forward and get the additional elements from Build Back Better done. But I think that we need to take from what we're seeing, that things that have been very hard and we haven't done before, we're starting to do. We just need to do more of them, and we need to move more quickly. And certainly, look, internationally and globally, there are myriad challenges, and I would not downplay those, and I would not try to deny those away. But you could see coming out of Glasgow this year, you could see the elements of that big deployment of capital at scale that is so necessary, urging itself to want to move more quickly. And we have in so many of these different markets and sectors, we are now on the downward curve of cost and deployment, where it's really not a question of whether capital will move, but just how quickly capital will move. And I think that what I've seen in capital markets is that it takes longer than you think for those to get to those big breakpoint moments. But then once you get there, capital move very quickly, and I think we're seeing those tipping point moments in a number of particular parts of the market. So I'm optimistic, certainly, about what we can as a country get done over the next couple of years and demonstrate to the world what the implications of that are. But I'm impatient because we have to move as much as we've done over the last year, and as much as we have gotten done. We're going to need to move even more quickly and be more successful if we're really going to get this done.
Well, we're all very excited about the investments in de-risking and pre-development capital and the infrastructure bill. The flexibility of the American Rescue Plan offers communities to integrate those monies, and rooting for a climate booster shot. I know a lot of folks in our Muni Bond Network and our Institutional Investor Network are excited about the opportunities there. Brian, I want to thank you so much for your work, your service. I know these jobs during COVID times are like double dog years. You're looking good, sir. And really, again, thank you for coming. So next up, we're going to reshuffle the chairs on our Zoom stage. And when we return in just a few minutes, we will hear from 3 city CFOs working at the front lines, taking a break from their ongoing strategy sessions alongside the Public Finance Forum this week. Thanks again for watching. And again, thank you, Director Deese. Good day.